Hey guys. Okay, so compared to last week's episode, this one walked a bit of a weird line for me. Because on one hand, pretty much just like with Odin's death, the way they had built up like Toki's demise, like before and after sending the Prince Akazaya Nine into the future, was on a technical level masterful from just a soundtrack, animation, and voice acting perspective. Like on a technical level, that this episode was absolutely brilliant. But on the other hand, compared to Owen's death, where it did feel like there was slightly more of a logical reason in order to extend the episode, i.e., building up the final months like before his death, this episode, for me personally, just barely gets away with that idea. And there are a lot of more moments that feel like, okay, now we're getting back to the kind of padding that feels like, okay, yeah, this is here for the sake of not catching up to the manga, with a major caveat being, I still understand why pretty much Toei did this, because if the preview is any indication, that they wanted to save one of the bigger reveals for next week's episode. Like it's pretty much official at this point that pretty much every major reveal like beyond this point is probably going to happen in next week's episode, and probably maybe the episode after that. But yeah, so I can kind of understand. And honestly, another thing about this episode is that on one hand, okay, I pretty much understand it. Is another thing that kind of bugged me, that was also that was in the manga too, frankly, is that even though I pretty much understand it in order for the sake of pretty much Toki pretty much delivering her prophecy, her speech to the public of Wano, there is a little bit something. There is a little bit weird, something weird about how there's something a little bit weird in terms of how her of how her pretty much death was pretty much delayed in the way it was. Like I would have expected like I don't know what I was expecting in terms of how she would deliver that speech, but it was just felt a little weird. Like after sending the Akazaya Nine away, that her death didn't happen like much sooner after. But again, it's a small nitpick. Um, and with that said, one thing I actually really do like is how the slower pacing of the episode allowed me to appreciate a lot of smaller moments. A lot of smaller moments among the Yakuza 9 and Toki that essentially set the stage for relationships and events in the present time of Wano. For example, we pretty much do get a better understanding of how the animosity between Neko Mamushi and Inuarashi had started. And even though their argument was in some ways trivial, you can still understand what would pretty much lead them to blaming each other, because at this point at this point in time, emotions are running high, and they're thinking, okay, I just need someone to blame. I just need someone to blame. I need someone to take out my frustration on, because I just can't deal with this total failure kind of thing. Like they couldn't process. It's something where they just couldn't process their own failure, so they ended up just taking it out on each other. And we basically get an added touch of Kinemon being forced to leave, like from Denjiro and Ashita behind, which on Ashita's end, it does add a lot more tragedy towards how Ashita had become so bitter towards Kinemon, and even more so the fact that he was sent in 20 years into the future, and Ashura wasn't with him. That just kind of adds even more to just the overall bitterness he was probably feeling, that he was waiting 20 years for them. And Denjiro, and seeing what happened in terms of Denjiro seeing what happens to him before being left behind. Actually, it's one of those things where it doesn't add too much overall, but one thing I will add when it comes to like seeing Denjiro being left behind, is it provides a much smoother transition when we're going to later learn what happened to him, like in next week's episode. Like a lot of, again, from the preview, a lot of next week's episode is going to be focused on pretty much what pretty much happened to Denjiro after that, after they was captured or whatnot. So yeah, now with that said, let's talk about the new wrinkle we learned in this episode, or I guess new for anime onlys, which is that Kaido pretty much, which is that on top of the fact that it wasn't just enough in order to burn Odin Castle. Like Kaido himself had chosen to, in order to go there himself, in order to personally kill Toki and Momonosuke. Which, yeah, looking back as a manga reader, carries a whole new context now. Because before I thought he's just doing it in order to make sure the job gets done. But the more I look at this moment now, the more I realize that in the moment, it was the first time that Kaido became genuinely fearful of Odin's premonition and the threat of the Kozuki clan. And I don't think it's any and I don't think the for him the fear itself doesn't come from any like real rational place either, but just from the idea that in the same way way with Roger, Odin died with a smile on his face, and to him that's kind of what that in his own way is what forced him to recognize that the Kozuki is are as much a danger are real danger to him and his vice grip over Wano, so he wanted to crush the legacy before it could take shape. That is, of course, if you pretty much style it like Prince Momonosuke as a threat. Of course, as we see, Momonosuke in a weird way, Momonosuke showing weakness in the moment. It basically saved. It is what saved him, as Kaido as just seeing Momonosuke groveling and crying. It basically it just Kaido just kind of chose to dismiss him as a threat after that. But truthfully, if Kaido had even like despite Momonosuke's like groveling and whatnot, if Kaido had only chosen in that moment to kill Momonosuke, he would have ended the whole rebellion then and there. But now, with current events as they are, they're kind of a mess of his own making because he allowed Momonosuke to bloom into the more capable leader he is now. So yeah, it is interesting how that one little decision he made, and that it might pretty much end up being his downfall in the end. Um, and it is on top of that, it is kind of interesting to see the final conclusion that Toki does come to the end, with her like realizing that her purpose ultimately like it wasn't to usher in the return in the return of the history of the world that has been forgotten and the future and the future that it would and the future itself, but rather she realized her mission was to be a guide for those who will carry on the mantle and open up Wano to those who will lead the world into its new future. It doesn't matter what it is, come what may. And Wano is the focal point where everything will change. And Toki, even though the thing she did in that moment is to just kind of is lit the torch of hope for the future. And in more general terms, it is kind of a very insane fuck you to Orochi with how both Odin and Toki had managed in their own ways to keep hope alive for the future, however small, and it kept everyone pushing forward despite the hardships at Orochi's hands. But yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I've got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyst, Crunchyroll, and be sure to hit the like, the subscribe button, and the bell, and share this video around. Death Knight of Anime, signing off. Later, guys.